Okay, this is December 6th, Tuesday night Bible study. We are in a series on marriage. The subcategory for the next couple of weeks is sex and romance and marriage. And we are using as our basic text the Song of Solomon. I have sent out to the group a translation by Marvin Pope. I will have other translations to supplement as we get more and more into this. And let me back up and just give a context, especially as we begin to move more deeply into the reality of their romance and attractions that are God designed, and how it plays out. Under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, Solomon wrote this, and how this plays out for our benefit, and how when you try to suppress this sort of thing, it only has negative results. It's not good to build little picket fences around things when God gives you things within marriage to keep it vital and romantic and alive and to be what he intended it to be. And when we repress things, then it's like the air in the balloon. If we squeeze it here, the air has to go somewhere else, and that's not good. Now, today we're going to spend some time in chapter 3, and chapter 3 is composed of two parts. Two scenes. One scene in which the Shulamite woman is longing for her fiancé, her betrothed is a more accurate word, Solomon, her love. And one scene she expects him, she goes out to find him. And the second scene deals with the actual marriage, the wedding ceremony. And then chapter 4, sort of their honeymoon conversation. And at the end of chapter 4 and the beginning of chapter 5, the actual consummation of their marriage, their own lovemaking. But I want to back up before I get into 3, just to discuss a few things. The language, as we'll see as we get deeper into the book, and when I bring out the other more nuanced translations, the language is very romantic, very real, and very erotic, and it implies what you and I would describe as as real, the normal attraction between a man and a woman, a boy and a girl that unites them to get married. It is the opposite of the Victorian era of all this proper repressive formalities, and it flies against the sense of what was proper by some of the early church fathers who had a real issue with sex and the body and other things, including Augustine and Jerome and others. And hence their preference to only dwell on some sort of allegorical level. In chapter 1, we see that this vineyard keeper, this girl, the Shulamite woman who's never named, but I said she's probably Abishag. The Shulamite woman is being housed, part of the time at least, in Solomon's palace, and her mother would have a home in Jerusalem, and the fields are out north of Jezreel and other places where the vineyards and the sheep are, and vineyards and sheep and that sort of thing. These people moved around just as we do today. So just because you had a vineyard or you kept sheep, it didn't mean that that's where you lived. You had people you hired to help do that kind of thing. And at any rate, we saw that she was darkened from the sun because she was out having to manage a number of vineyards by the demands of her own brothers. And this was not something that you would necessarily find culturally super attractive. You might, but the point was that she has to take a moment to explain why she is so dark. And she obviously has this tremendous love for Solomon. And she's proud of the fact, she's happy, maybe proud is the wrong word, because we go down different little rabbit holes there with pride and sin. But she's happy with the idea that he is attractive to the other women. That in a sense, they all envy her because he's head over heels in love with her. And he is head over heels in love with her. And so we come to chapter 3, and prior to this, I had read, "Catch us foxes, little foxes, vineyard spoilers, our vineyards in bloom." And that's where she turns. Those are her words, and she turns probably to the bodyguards, the attendants of Solomon, and talks about sort of metaphorically that those things that can ruin a vineyard because the little foxes would eat the grapes and so forth, that they can also ruin, a relationship. So let's make sure that we don't take anything for granted. And she goes on, "My love is mine and I am his, who browse on the lotus until the day breeze and the shadows flee. Turn and be my love, like a buck or young stag on the mountain cleavage," an allusion to her form, to her body. And so one of the first things I wanted to bring up, we get a little more, I guess we go PG rated in this, or R, I'm not sure how the movies do this, but I want to back up and give you a context so that we don't bring our own assumptions into this relationship. In the Old Testament, when you courted, when you dated, it didn't remotely resemble. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie with John Wayne and Maureen O'Hara and Ward Bond and others called The Quiet Man. But he is a retired and ex-prize fighter that goes to Ireland, his home country, and he's attracted to the sister of this powerful man, and they eventually court with the intent of marriage. And in this courting, you would have a chaperone, and so you would ride out with the chaperone and all of this. They didn't have that in the Old Testament days. That is the result of Neoplatonism entering the church in the 300s, 400s, and the Middle Ages, more of a duality, a dualism between spirit and body, one good, the other less good, or evil even, which was Gnostic and heretical. And the Victorian era in Western civilization personified that, unfortunately, more than any other culture. It was not good. It was satanic, is actually what it was. And the offspring of that Victorian sort of behavior produced some of the worst deviations, perversions, and pornography ever as a result of people being other than what they were intended to be. In the Old Testament, the marriage was a covenant, and it was a covenant instituted by God, and it was consummated with sexual intercourse, and that was considered sacrosanct, pure, beautiful, God's design, and all of the emotion and the attractions and the anticipation, the titillation, everything else were God designed. I mean, that's how the body works. If the male didn't become aroused, you would never be able to consummate with sexual intercourse. The hormones, the brain, the body, both in the man and the woman, are designed to work the way they work. And what you'll find in the Old Testament is a very different sense of the boy-girl relationship than what we've even been taught in evangelical circles. I want to talk about the individual who's now off, I think, into gay sex and paganism and all kinds of stuff, who introduced the idea of kiss dating goodbye, because you had to be so pure and you had to be a virgin when you got married, all of which is in the Old Testament, the idea of being a virgin and not having intercourse until you were married. But his whole idea that dating was wrong and evil and not of God, and his structured approach to marriage, that, marriages were totally false, totally made up out of thin air, and then he's off into the wilder pastures of Gnosticism, unbelief, and total perversion. And that is a result of going against what was designed. So what was it like in the Old Testament? Well, as I said, the marriage relationship was designed by God. It was sacred. It has a sanctifying effect, so that even if you marry an unbeliever, your children are sanctified in the eyes of God because you're married. You're conforming to that design. Now, I want to give an example after I make a statement. I want to give an example of things that the Old Testament is concerned about from a sexual standpoint between men and women. First of all, there are no rules about dating. None. There are no rules about masturbation. None. Zip. Nothing in the whole Old Testament. And what the Old Testament does do is it addresses intercourse outside of marriage, not petting, not kissing, but intercourse outside of marriage. And it also addresses adultery, which is intercourse when you're married or betrothed to be married with somebody other than you're married to or betrothed to. Those two instances. So for instance, if we were to go to Exodus chapter 22, we're going to find that God has this provision that if a man and a woman actually have sexual intercourse, not that they're kissing, not that they're petting, not that they're being with each other and having a good time, but if they actually have sexual intercourse, then he is obligated to go to her father to marry her. And the father can refuse that relationship. He can say, no, I don't think you're reliable. I don't like you. I don't think you're trustworthy. I don't want my daughter involved with you for the rest of her life. And if that's the case, in either case, whether he accepts or whether he rejects the young man, what the young man has to do is pay the marriage dowry, which in those days would have been about 50 shekels and would have amounted to a couple of years, 2-3 years of work. It was a hefty dowry. If I were to translate this into modern language, if I had had sexual intercourse with a girl, and it was not rape, and she was not betrothed, and she was not married, I would have to go to her father and pay $120,000, $150,000, whether I got the girl or not. I mean, it was a hefty sum, and it certainly discouraged promiscuous behavior. It certainly discouraged sexual intercourse before I'm married. Obviously, if I'm paying this guy, Mr. Brown, $120,000, I'm not going to go with Mr. Smith's daughters the next week and get in the same incident. I'll be in debtor's prison. The book of Deuteronomy in chapter 22 and 25 addresses different situations, one of which is the same one addressed in Exodus chapter 22, verse, I think, 16 and 17. The book of Deuteronomy in chapter 22 addresses in a series this one in which the woman is not betrothed to anybody, and he has sex with her, and again, he has to pay the fine. When you go to all the laws of Moses, when you go to all the laws from God through Moses and everything else, what it is concerned with is proper sexual intercourse between a proper husband and a proper wife. And when you get into Leviticus chapter 18 or 19, it talks about whom you cannot have that husband-wife relationship with. It never addresses the kind of relationship that exists romantically between the man and the woman up until they consummate their marriage. There are no, you can kiss for 5 seconds or you can kiss for a minute. There's no guidance of any kind in that regard. I want to take up an often misunderstood and actually broadly misunderstood by some, and that is the sin of Onan in Genesis chapter 37. Genesis chapter 37 deals with a man who dies, and he leaves Tamar, his wife, without child. And so her father-in-law, Jacob, the son of Isaac, the son of Abraham, Jacob is supposed to allow one of his other sons to impregnate her so that the name of her husband who died does not disappear from the historical line of the Jews of Israel. It's set up so that child that would be born, and it would be, he could have 2 or 3 daughters and still they would need like a male child, and then there's a fallback position on that, but that's too complicated to go into all this stuff. But at any rate, the idea is that the male child that would be eventually born would carry on the name of that original husband. And this is picked up in much later, because obviously Jacob and Tamar and these people way precede Moses in time, so you don't have the Mosaic law, but it is picked up in the Mosaic law. And in Deuteronomy, that particular situation is addressed in chapter 25 about the obligation to raise up children for the deceased male, through whom that name would happen. We see something similar to that in Ruth and Boaz, in which when Boaz discovers that there is a closer next of kin to be Ruth's husband Chilion, was deceased, that child would be raised up under the former husband's name. And so that person is offered a chance to impregnate Ruth, and he turns it down for any number of reasons. First of all, he could have been old enough that he couldn't impregnate her, or he could have had his sons and daughters and everything else already detailed in his will, and who was going to get what, and he just didn't want the obligation. And he didn't want to diminish what his planned inheritance maybe already announced to his children was, and so forth. Any number of reasons. But anyway, Boaz then becomes the next kinsman who can fulfill that principle that even preceded the Mosaic law, going back to Jacob. Now, I brought this up because the sin of one of his sons, Onan, is used to describe masturbation, and that's simply not the case. In Genesis 37, the Holy Spirit is very specific in saying that when Onan is having sexual intercourse with Tamar, that he knows that the child is not going to be his. It's not going to be his name carrying on that. And so he's going through the motions, literally, and he's spilling his semen on the ground. And it is for that reason that God actually kills him, physically kills him. And we need to more and more, this is probably a later series of teaching on the law or something, but we need to distinguish very clearly between physical death and spiritual death. People who were spiritually saved were physically killed for things that they did. And also people who were spiritually lost were killed for things they did as well. But at any rate, God, it says, killed Onan because he was not doing what he was supposed to be doing, which would be raising up her children for this other brother. And because of this, Jacob decides that he's not going to let this one son have intercourse with Tamar, because he doesn't want to lose another son. And so what Tamar does is she goes out and she puts a veil on and appears like a common prostitute on a corner that would be frequented by shepherds and so forth. And she meets Judah there, and Judah the father, not Jacob. Judah's the father of Onan and so forth. She meets Judah there, and she has sex and gets impregnated by him. So when she becomes pregnant within the family, and he knows he hasn't allowed his other sons to impregnate her, they assume that she's out making money on her own, playing the prostitute, and he's going to punish her. And then she reveals that he was in fact the father, because she has his staff and his ring and that sort of thing, that she can prove that when he encountered her, that he was the father, and that you are the father because you weren't fulfilling this law, this principle of God, that if my husband dies, then we still need to have children for all the promises and the inheritance and so forth. Again, what is picked up formally much later in Moses' law. But that whole incident has nothing to do with masturbation or anything else. It has to do with an individual who has a task to perform, to raise up children for his brother, and is not doing it. So, as we get into the song, I will be going back through chapters 1 and 2 and other places to bring out some of the more romantic elements, but first I'm just trying to cover the main plot as we go through this, and probably around chapter 6 I'll start going back and bringing out some other things. Now in chapter 3, the Shulamite is still speaking, and she says, "On my bed at night," and you'll see, like in the New American Standard Version, a translation, or "on my bed throughout the nights," plural. But this is actually an intensified form of the noun. They had night watches. So you had the first watch, the second watch, the third watch, and so forth. And so it's through the watches of the night. I'm on my bed, and I sought him whom I love. I sought, but I did not find him. She was probably under the impression that they were going to have a rendezvous at on that particular night, based on other dating nights and other things. And he's king. You know, he probably got tied up in business and knew that he was running late, and he's not going to send a message to her. He doesn't want people to know their dating habits or what's going on, so he doesn't send her a word. Now, let me explain why in some of your footnotes, I don't remember what was in the ESV, the English Standard Version, or even the MacArthur Study Bible, what some of them say, but some of the commentaries will talk about this being a dream. And the reason that it's just like that thing when I was teaching on a woman being an apostle. And I talked about how it even worked its way not only into the way they viewed the manuscript, but also the dictionary and the grammars, that you would have some scholars say, well, it perhaps could be this if this, and then that's picked up as if it's so. Well, Delitzsch was a Bible-believing commentator in the 1800s, and he thought that that it would be an affront to this lady's Victorian ethics if she was actually expecting her boyfriend, her fiance, her betrothed, a stronger word than fiance, betrothed, her betrothed, to actually show up in her room where they could be together. Now again, they're not contemplating sexual intercourse. They're talking about being together, kissing, talking, visiting, whatever. And Delitzsch thought that would be an affront to her modesty. And so he said, so this has to be a dream. There's no language here of a dream. And, maybe the liberals think that the conservatives, it was an affront to reality, and so they said that the resurrection of Christ really happened. Well, and the liberal can say, no, they just dreamed it. No. You have these people all, again, walking around these white picket fences of their issues, their garbage, their baggage. And that was put into a very significant commentary. It's called the Kyle and Delitzsch Commentary by two strong conservatives. And Delitzsch handled this part, the Song of Solomon, among others. And that influenced a lot of people. There is no dream. And there's no language of a dream. And there's no reference to a dream. On my bed at night or through the night watches, I sought him whom I love. I sought him, but did not find him. I will rise and roam the city, in the streets and squares. I will seek him whom I love. Now again, this is not improper behavior. You had, this is evident from the book of Esther and other places, you had watchmen throughout the city, and they would be like our constables or police today. There were watchmen over the various parts of the palace. There were watchmen through the city squares so that you would prevent brawls, you would prevent theft, you would prevent any number of things. I sought him but did not find him. The guards found me, they who patrol the city. Well, that's actually what took place. Guards patrolled the city of Jerusalem. Jerusalem back at the time of David and Solomon was not, we wouldn't even probably call it a town. It would be a town, but certainly not a city. And but it was a city to them, very small. And she asked the guards, "Have you seen the one I love?" Now she doesn't have to say, "Have you seen Solomon?" because she's in the precincts of his palace, and everybody would know that this is his betrothed. Scarce had I passed them by when I found the one I love. So he's probably finished with whatever diversion or business made him late, and she finds him. I grasped and would not loose him till I brought him to my mother's house, to the chamber of her who conceived me. So she wants a little privacy. She takes him to his mother's house rather than going back into the palace. And then she says, I adjure you, Jerusalem girls. Remember, she's telling the female attendants to her. She's telling them the story of their romance. And so she happens, after having talked in chapter 1 and chapter 2, she's now giving a specific incident that had some thrillingness to it, some suspense, and so forth. And so she says, I adjure you, Jerusalem girls, by the gazelles or hinds of the steps, that you neither incite or excite love until it is eager. We have to wait for the proper time. Who is this ascending from the step like columns of smoke? And so she's talking about Solomon coming. Redolent with myrrh and incense. All the peddlers' powders. Behold Solomon's bed or couch. 60 heroes, bodyguards, soldiers round it. Valiants of Israel. All of them war-skilled, battle-taught, each with sword at his side against night terror. A litter he made for himself, did King Solomon, from wood of Lebanon. He made its posts silver, its bolster gold, its cushion purple wool, its sides love inlaid, decorated with romance. Jerusalem girls come out, they look. O Zion, that's another name for Jerusalem. O Zion's girls, they look at King Solomon. At the crown his mother gave him on his wedding day, on the day of his heart's delight. When you would wear a crown like a king, no matter whether you were a shepherd or a king. And it was usually a wreath, and his mother Bathsheba would have made this crown on his wedding day. So she's taking this up to the actual wedding ceremony in which Solomon's mother Bathsheba was there. And it was like his crowning day when he was crowned king, because he was marrying his bride, this Shulamite. First thing I want us to gain tonight is that the scene in chapter 3, verse 1 through 5 is very real. And it's not unlike something we haven't experienced in our own courting and dating. And that is that the other person doesn't show up. Are they with somebody else? Has something happened to them? Are they no longer interested? All those tensions and questions, no doubt, in her heart. And so she leaves her room in the palace and she goes out into the precincts looking for him. I wonder if he's here or there. And because it's late. She waited at least a couple of watches from when it became dark. So it's late. She's into maybe the second watch. And she eventually finds him. And she takes him not back to where they were going to have their rendezvous, her own chamber, but she takes him to her mother's house. And then it switches. It switches to him on the procession, the wedding procession. And he's attended and guarded in this beautiful array as he's carried in. And he's actually crowned on his wedding day by his mother Bathsheba with a wreath. And then what we get in the next chapter, which I'll go into next week, and by next week I may start reading some of the other translations, which are a little more romantic in their literalness and in their nuances. But next week we'll go through their conversation and their repertoire between themselves until they finally consummate on their honeymoon their marriage in chapter 5, verse 1. And then we most likely have in chapter 5, verse 1, the eat, friends, drink, be drunk with love. That is probably Jehovah speaking. But we'll get there when we get to it. So I think that's enough for tonight. Any questions? I don't know if somebody has to take it off mute or what, but are there any questions?